Hey IB environmental students, if you missed the class right before winter break, we are doing stuff on conservation strategies, and I've updated this PowerPoint, so even if you saw it in class, you might want to skim through this podcast to see if you can get something better out of it than maybe you got in class. Okay, let's get started. So for 4.3, we're going to only focus on a couple of the objectives. This is one of them, 4.3.1, which is really focusing on why we're really going to argue and how we're going to argue for preserving species and their habitats. So there's going to be direct values and indirect values. Direct values are going to be things that immediately affect humans, and they're easier to track because we can really see the connection between these values and us. Indirect things, I can tell if those things are immediately impacting me or if they really matter because I can't see clear connections to humans. So which one do you think people really focus on the most? Probably the direct. But it would be really good if we could think about these indirect values more, even though it's harder to notice them. So let's focus on the direct ones first. Here's one of them. So we get food from biodiversity. We eat lots of species. We eat plants, animals, lots of delicious things come from the environment. Actually, all of our things that we eat come from the environment. And we've learned why monocultures aren't so good anyways. And a lot of the pests that come from the environment, they'll usually occur when biodiversity goes down anyways. And there are a lot of pest management strategies that might occur or be possible if we do have diversity, because a lot of organisms will keep other pests in check when our crops are more diverse. Another option to think about direct values is the fact that our habitats and lots of species produce natural products. These could be medicine, these could be fertilizer or pesticides that are natural, which is good and organic. We get a lot of our energy resources from the environment, guys. And if we destroy the habitat, well, it might not be possible to get them anymore. And then we get a lot of our things like to make clothes, to make other sort of accoutrements for the kitchen. Lots of things come from the environment that we can easily track. Now let's talk indirect values. Remember, these are the ones we usually don't focus on as much, but we probably should focus on them more. The things like ecosystem productivity, that all organisms are connected together through a giant food web. All the trophic levels depend on one another in order to pass matter and energy throughout the ecosystem. And if one organism's affected, the rest are going to be. And if we're thinking about habitat being destroyed, that's going to affect everything for sure. But even just one species could really do some damage to the rest of the ecosystem. We can get scientific. So with scientific and educational value, we can learn so much from nature. All of us can, and that's exactly what you guys are doing by taking this class and thinking about how we as humans impact nature and how nature might be able to impact us and what we can do better to conserve it. Additionally, we can use different things in nature as control agents. For instance, there are a lot of species like aphids that can eat pests. This is very much related to the previous slide, thinking about how without biodiversity, our crops might fail. So this one's really related to the food resources one that was a direct guy. And then genes. There's tons of unique gene combinations out there. We have no idea what uses we could get out of them, whether it's disease resistance or making chemicals or making medicine. All the genes that exist in the various species on the planet might be of use someday. We can also monitor the environment through lots of organisms. Things like salmon can tell us water quality, and things like lichen can show air quality. Those are the mossy looking things that are actually rather gray looking on rocks and trees. And if the air is bad, they die. Remember, affect one thing, affect them all, and we can really see those connections. Recreational, lots of us love going hiking, biking, and kayaking and all sorts of things outside. So if we destroy the environment, there goes those activities. Human health, it's healthy one to go outside, but also from nature we can make antibiotics, cancer drugs. The options are limitless, but if we destroy the things, maybe we won't have them anymore. It's a human right. That's really referring to more of the habitat aspect of biodiversity. If we destroy land, a lot of native people don't really have the ability to legislatively defend themselves. So if we take away native people's lands, it's pretty not super moral or ethical, which leads us to ethics. Ethically, we can think like the Lorax. All species have a right to exist, but this is a very ecocentric view, and we know a lot of humans are more on the anthrocentric and technocentric side of the spectrum, and we're not really thinking this way. But maybe we should at least consider where some people might be coming from that do think that way. There's two major approaches to solving these issues about biodiversity. We can use the species or the habitat approach. The species approach is really going to focus, well, on species. It'll also protect their environment somewhat, but not really the most important thing. So this is very much like the IUNC Red List, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a species approach. They're going to manage the habitat somewhat, but really they're going to somehow put money in to protect the endangered species. They'll capture them and in a captive environment try to help them grow in numbers in their population. And when they do, maybe that was in a zoo, they'll try to reintroduce the species into a suitable place later. This compares to habitat approach, which is really going to create a nature reserve or something along those lines, where the biome itself, the actual ecosystem, is intact, whether it's terrestrial or aquatic. This is usually thought to be the stronger approach because this will keep governments or private purchases from really impacting the environment. Species are going to be in their more natural area. They might not have invasive problems like the cane toad. The native populations, whether they're plants or animals, are really being focused on. And if there's any degradation for the soil or other things like erosion, the park systems that exist that are nature reserves usually take care of those. So this is harder. It's usually more expensive, but it usually does a better job. Another way of thinking about this is, if I try to save one species but the habitat goes, is the species still going to exist anyways? Maybe in a zoo, but who knows about the long run. So we can think about these as these two words. We could protect a species outside its original place or inside its original home. So this guy ex situ is going to really be focused on more of a species approach, and in situ more of a habitat approach. And here's some ways we could kind of try to conserve the species. So with the species approach, we could kind of keep track of species within a zoo and try to increase their numbers. We could have, for plants, botanical gardens or seed banks. For habitats, there's nature reserves, national parks, there's even marine parks that exist, and we're going to talk more about bioreserves next class. I really don't think you need to know all of these in detail, so just breeze through these next couple of slides. So seed banks pretty much are like Jurassic Park for seeds. The seeds are kept in climate control, cool environments so that they don't germinate. If it's really cool, it's hopefully meant to be that one day, if we're in need and the environment suddenly exists for some rando seed that's no longer in the wild, we could grow it. But who knows if that's really viable, and it takes a lot of money to hold this many seeds somewhere where that's climate controlled. Not everybody's homes are climate controlled, but keeping seeds is climate controlled. Anyways, it's a complicated situation. Botanical gardens also take care of plant biodiversity. They're going to actually do the growing part, and sometimes they do research there. So there's a lot of really cool ones. There's some really close to us. If you're ever interested in visiting them, they do research at both of those places. One's for trees and one's just in general. They're mostly going to have greenhouses, but these are expensive, and they're not really releasing them back into the wild. They're propagating them in this one little area. Captive breeding programs is really focused on zoos. For the most part, there's our zoo. The animals we try to get them to breed, but hopefully, like big cats, they don't like to breed very much, and sometimes they end up killing each other. And sometimes when we release things, think about Free Willy, they don't even do so well. They don't even know how to hunt. They're not used to their whole ecosystem when we do release them, especially if they were born in the zoo. Another problem is if there is too few organisms. This happens with tigers and cheetahs and all organisms, but we've seen some in the current news these days that they can get some inbreeding issues and no longer produce viable offspring if the population's too low. Lastly, we're going to talk nature reserves. This is actually its own objective, and we're going to focus on it more next class. So this is just a preview. These are going to conserve species and their habitats, like we talked about. They're terrestrial or marine. There's a lot of advantages. We've talked about some of them, like there being more natural stuff there since it's the whole habitat. There's more genetic diversity since it's a complex ecosystem. We can observe as scientists natural patterns and their natural interactions. Some of the disadvantages are that you might not even be able to find some of the rare species if you have to sift through a whole ecosystem, versus in a zoo, it's easy. You just propagate the rare one and make a whole room full of it if you wanted. And then if there is habitat loss for some reason, and the legislation that created the protected area isn't doing its job, you might lose species anyways, and that's kind of a Debbie Downer. Here's some management issues, and this is our last slide. Within a nature reserve or a national park in our area, they usually try to get rid of invasive or alien species. That's like the cane toad for us. That's a lot of ivy and kudzu, which is mostly plant issues in our area. They'll try to restore degraded areas where there's desertification or erosion. They're going to encourage protection of some of the threatened species. We learned about some of them in our area, like the eagle and the Delmarva fox squirrel, and they're going to keep humans from building land there or hunting, building roads there or hunting. So a lot of these things are really good. Next class we'll start on this slide, which is talking about a specific program that makes reserves, and you guys will even be building a reserve. So good job, guys. I'm really proud of you, and I hope you have a wonderful winter break.